Welcome to the Southampton Education School Research Seminar Series. I am Achla Gupta. I'm a lecturer and program coordinator of our seminar series. Our events are open to all. We aim to facilitate meaningful conversations and contribute to advancement in the field of education. Thank you so much for your interest in this event. I hope you enjoy it. Please feel free to visit our website for details about our upcoming events.
Welcome to everybody here and online. It's great to see so many of you. And as Achala said, the title of my presentation, as you can all see, is Developing Research That Makes a Difference, Promoting Inclusive and Democratic Schools. And I thought I'll start by clarifying what I mean by making a difference in schools through research especially through the kind of research that I'm engaged with, which is research with schools, collaborating with schools in order to develop inclusion. So one of the features that making a difference means for me through the research that I'm engaged with is this idea of engaging and enhancing students' confidence. So it's about making every child feeling confident about their learning and overall becoming more confident. And I'm going to share with you a video from some students that were involved in a collaborative action research study that we carried out with a group of researchers in various European countries. This is from an English school. And these particular children that you're going to listen in a minute, they were students that were seen as hard to reach in some ways by their teachers, and they wanted to give them a leading role becoming student researchers, which is what we developed with them through this research study. So as part of their role of becoming student researchers, and I'll give more examples later on what that role involved, they had to lead lessons in front of their own classmates. And we're talking about primary school children. This particular one, they were in year 5, 10, 11-year-old students. And here they talk about their experience of leading lessons. So let's listen to what they're saying in terms of that role.
So, what was the most challenging part of this project for you?
Talking in front of the class, because at that point I didn't have my confidence, and I didn't want to fail my teachers, my teaching assistants, my friends, the other people in my class. And I had these doubts saying, like, you can't do this was a stupid idea, why did you agree? And yeah, so I just got really worried, so I hid behind a whiteboard.
But now you've grown, right?
Yeah, and now I can just talk.
Sky high.
So if you had it to do it again and go into a class and lead a lesson, do you think it would be different?
100%. I would love to do that again. I hope we do get to do that again. Can we get to do that again?
Yeah.
Yes!
I think the lesson was the hardest part for me, because when I heard that we were going to do the lesson, I was like, okay, if you didn't know, but I was planning a long time thinking of what I was going to say, how I'm going to get the children to listen to me and everything like that. And when the lesson came, it was a breeze. So I think that was the hardest part for me, trying to think of what I'm going to do and going to say. But I think it was very, very good.
It was a very good lesson.
If you have to give advice to your researchers, then my advice is plan a bit, but don't plan every bit. Think of some of it on the spot where it just won't be natural. And it'll be a lot better if you think of most of it on the spot, but the base of what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Just think of the base, and then the rest of it, just think of on the spot. It's a lot better because I've done all that right now.
Yeah, I agree, because if you you should plan, but I don't think you should plan speaking, because if you do it on the spot, it's more natural of what you're saying.
Just plan what you're going to talk about.
Yeah,
and also if you plan what you're speaking as well, like the words, and you get a word wrong, like, because you've just practiced, you've got a bit wrong, or you've got a sentence wrong a bit. It's like, oh God, and then you freeze up a bit. You're like, wait, now you have to regather yourself. But if you're doing it on the spot, there's a main plan, but not what you're actually saying. So that won't happen. It will only be if you're not confident speaking to lots of people. And by the time you get to that, you'll be over it. Trust me, I should know. Oh man, I need a drink of water again.
I think the most challenging part for me was like Jaden when we had to teach a lesson, because at the start of the lesson I felt like kind of nervous. It was like nerve-wracking. But then as we got through the lesson, it felt more natural and like more confident.
It was very, very nerve-wracking at the start, but then I didn't want to be quiet, and at the end I just wanted to talk for the whole entire lesson.
So it was worth it?
Yeah, very much worth it.
Okay, and my last question for you guys. If you had an opportunity to do this again as researchers, would you like to do that?
Obviously!
Why would you ask that question? Obviously you would want to.
Even if I have to stun somebody.
So just to remind everybody, and through information that we gained through the teachers, as I said, those students were seen as hard to reach in some ways, including some very strong academically students, but didn't have the confidence. And what the first one was referring to, we were observing that he hid behind the board when he stood in front of the class for the first time, and the others supported him to come out and stand up. And to see this growth over the 3 years that we carried out this project was quite impressive. So it is about enhancing students' confidence when I'm talking about making a difference. But it's also about improving students' learning outcomes. So again, from this same project, this is based on work that was carried out again in an English school that we work with. And this is a reception class, so 5 to 6 years old children. And this particular student took the role of the researcher who was observing the lesson. So as the teacher said, that she has never seen that child to do so much writing. So just being given that training and taking that leading role enabled him to produce all that writing. And then towards the end, because they were doing it alongside the teachers, he was asking the teacher to sum up for him what he was noticing in the classroom. So it is about enhancing students' learning outcomes. But also for me, it is about developing quality of learning and teaching within schools, and doing that through professional learning, professional development, and also facilitating change of school cultures. So in the first code, there is this highlighting this secondary school teacher in Spain that was involved in one of our projects, and talking about this way of collaborating, which before she thought it was just dividing tasks when we do collaboration. And through this process of working alongside other teachers and children, she saw different possibilities. And we have lots of evidence from other teachers as well. And one of our head teachers in Austria, in this project that we collaborated with schools, she was referring to this approach that we developed, inclusive inquiry, which I'm going to give you an example later on, where teachers and children collaborate to design lessons to enhance everybody's participation. And she was saying how over the course of the 3 years of this study, they just changed the philosophy of the whole school. And it became from I and my class to we and our school. So for me, this is the most important in terms of changing the cultures of a whole school, and it's quite demanding. And I focus now on the making a difference at the school level. And of course, for us as researchers, it's about making a difference in terms of contribution to knowledge, and I will be coming back to that. So today, I'm going to focus on how can we develop research with schools to promote principles of inclusion and democracy, and also explore different methodological approaches that are likely to promote such ideas in school based on the work that I've carried out over the years. So in the first part of my presentation, I'm going to focus on the key concepts that I'm using, following by examples from different research studies over a number of years, and the roles that I have taken as researchers. So taking you through my journey as a researcher, and then focusing on implications for schools as well as for researchers. So key features of my work is inclusion and democracy as well. And I'm using definitions developed by authors, well-established authors in the field, leading author Melensko, focusing on inclusion as an ongoing process, not as something that we are going to achieve overnight and that we are finished with, and focusing on what are the barriers within a context and removing those barriers for all students, focusing on contextual barriers. And inclusion, focusing on the presence, participation, and achievement of all students. So it is about being there, participating, and achieving. So it's all three, and it is focusing on all students. So there are certain groups of students that we know from research that they may experience marginalization. They are more likely to experience marginalization. But at the same time, there may be other students not falling into those traditional categories that may experience marginalization. So it's about all students. At the same time, Peter Mittler, another leading author in the field, has argued about the need to focus on children and young people's views, voices, value what they have to say, regardless of age or labels. And this idea of students' voices has been a central feature of my work. And also, these notions of choice, self-determination, linked to notions of democracy as well. And Linda Darling-Harmon is arguing about if schools are to be agents of democracy, they need to be offering these opportunities for democratic communication and participation, which is again central features of my own work. As I said, students' voices and dialogues is another central feature that links to notions of inclusion. So the student voice movement started back in 1989, and since then has been influencing practice in schools as well as research. And it's a very broad term, and it ranges from expressing views verbally and non-verbally, as well as having an active role in decision-making processes, as Cook-Sather has argued. But also under this broad term, we have this notion of involving students as researchers or co-researchers who collect data, analyze data, and are active participants in the research process. And a central idea in my work, especially in the most recent times, is this notion of dialogue. So it's not just about voice and engaging with the voices of students, but it's also more about notions of dialogue, and I'm using Caroline Loach's definition here, which she says is beyond just a conversation, is building on that shared narrative, and dialogue means arriving at points that we would not get to on our own. So these are central key concepts that I've engaged with in my work. So to go back and to go where I started off as, I consider my research being in three phases. So in the first phase, I've done research on schools, and I've employed grounded theory approaches as suggested by Strauss and Corbin, where you study the phenomenon and inductively you identify the important features. So you don't start with a theory that you are going to test out, but through engagement with the field, you identify the features that are important. And I focus specifically on the identification of inclusive practices. And I was very much an outsider going into a school that was up in the north, in Manchester, where I did my studies, and spending time in the school trying to understand what was happening, and having some forms of engagement of my participants, the more traditional interviews, semi-structured interviews with teachers at that time I was engaged with. So this is the more distant researcher trying to make sense of the phenomena in terms of what you are focusing on. And then I've carried out a number of studies, including my PhD, which adopted ethnographic kind of studies approach. Ethnography means spending a long time within the field, where an ethnographic kind of study, as Lutz has defined it, means employing a range of some of the methods of ethnography, but not necessarily spending this big amount of time within a context. So I've done 3-4 studies, as I said, including my own PhDs, and I've employed participant observation. So I was a participant within the classes, researcher diary, crucial for any ethnographic study, interviews, teachers, students, informal conversation, sociograms, where I've asked students to nominate who they would like to play with, who they would like to work with, and then represented that visually and explored their nominations. Visual images, asked children to use drawings to express themselves. So this was the kind of studies that I engaged with in this first phase. And throughout this first phase, and still up to today, everything that I have done is informed by principles of inclusion and carrying out ethical research. So my work, the designs that I'm adapting, are focusing on this idea of being inclusive and involving the participants to the extent that is possible. So it is about understanding and valuing participants' perspectives, but also about the active involvement of participants. But it's also this notion of offering back to participants. So I was always of the view, having been a practitioner myself, that we need to offer back to the context that we're visiting. I experienced researchers coming into the schools and we never found out what happened with their findings. So I always felt the need to do that. And in my very first study, it was giving a report of my dissertation, as simple as that. The school read it, the head teacher discussed with the teachers, and it was that distant way of offering back to participants. But gradually, I was feeling more confident, and also I was feeling more the need to disrupt and the duty to disrupt, really. And I had to engage in some challenging decisions in doing that. So I'm going to share an example in a school that I carried out an ethnographic study. And I had carried out interviews with all children in the school, 250 in that particular school. And as I was collecting my data, I wanted to share with the teachers in a staff meeting the emerging themes. So one of the themes that came up was that in that particular school, children were not very positive about children coming from other countries into their school. And one of the students I interviewed said to me that we don't want these students in our school because they lower the standard of our school. So I shared that extract, I shared various extracts with the teachers in a staff meeting, making sure that the anonymity of each child was ensured and protecting children's identities. And I used it as a way of facilitating the discussion. And the teachers started thinking about that statement. And one of the teachers stood up and she said to me, Kiki, these ideas are definitely coming from home. These are not ideas that are coming from our school. And we discussed that. It may be, we cannot know, but the issue is that they're here, they're amongst your children. A number of children said that. So in terms of promoting inclusion, let's think about how can we start from what they express in order to promote inclusion and change such perceptions. Now, what I knew was that the student who said that to me was the daughter of that teacher. Now, I'll never know if she also knew and if the daughter shared that with her or if that was a natural reaction, but it's quite interesting to see this kind of resistance and how students' voices may make us think differently. So it was a challenging decision, but it is important if you want to do ethical research. If you're just going in without some inclination to disrupt what is happening in the context, we're not likely to achieve difference. So in the second phase of my work, I've moved from research on schools, which I classified the first two types of research I engaged with, into this idea of research with schools and employing approaches that others have employed in the field, where they classify themselves as researchers who work as outsiders, inverted commas, because we do go into the schools, and they work alongside participants. And this kind of research, as they argue, overcomes the traditional gap between research and practice. And this is an ongoing gap. How do we as researchers bring that gap between research and practice in schools? And we have employed collaborative with colleagues in a number of contexts, collaborative action research, which involves climates of inquiry in communities of practice with different stakeholders functioning as co-researchers. In the kind of studies that I'm involved in is about students becoming co-researchers as well as teachers and other participants in schools. And always, as with action research, you identify a problem, then you plan, you act on it, and then you evaluate and you reflect, and it is a cyclical process, but there is a focus on educational improvement. So behind all of that, we need to develop and improve further what is happening in schools. So the kind of studies that I've engaged with, as I said, is with schools, and I'm going to give a flavor through two interconnected studies that I carried out in collaboration with a number of colleagues in 5 European countries: Austria, Denmark, England, and Portugal and Spain. England when it was part of the European Union, from the dates that are there up to 2020. So the first study focused on secondary schools, whereas the second one on primary schools. And we work with a total of 30 primary schools across the 5 countries and across 8 secondary schools in the first one. So the first one led to the ideas of the second one. And to go back to the design and what I've said about collaborative action research, we adapted what Ensko, Booth and Dyson suggested back in 2006 for the second project, which is illustrating the kinds of roles that different stakeholders within research are taking. So for the reaching the hard to reach, we use this at the start of the project to engage both with practitioners as well as with researchers. So they are arguing that on one side, we have the practitioners who are preoccupied with developing practices, whereas on the right-hand side, there is the researchers, which we are more interested in developing understandings. But there are interconnections between the processes of the two. So we as researchers, we have the research questions. We want to find out what is of our interest and builds on our agenda. But the teachers are interested primarily on the existing practices. And in the particular project, we developed this idea of inclusive inquiry, where they had to develop, design research lessons, planning, teaching, and evaluating. And we were monitoring through observation, focus group surveys, accounts of practice, and analyzing those. And the idea is that that led to more inclusive practices through the analysis that we've carried out in collaboration with them, and our focus was on contribution to knowledge. But there are links between the two, but the roles of each of the participants is different, as these authors have argued. And we started from that. So the research agenda, what we were trying to find out was, how can we reach out to all our students, especially those seen as hard to reach, any child in school? That was the starting point. And actually, we were focusing on hard to reach lessons as opposed to hard to reach students. So that was the focus. And we carried out 3 cycles of collaborative action research. It was a 3-year study. We supported and monitored the developments in the school, and we monitored impact on teachers' thinking and practices and impact on all children's engagement, particularly those who were seen as hard to reach. Conceptually, this is what inclusive inquiry is. It involves a set of interconnected processes, but at the heart of what we are doing and what makes the difference is that idea of student-teacher dialogue. We started from students' voices and we moved into dialogues. So we are arguing, as we talk about learning and teaching, we learn from differences and we develop inclusive practices. But all these are interconnected. In practice, this is the conceptual representation of the processes. In practice, the process involves 3 steps: plan, teach, and analyze. And there are specific steps that schools were using in order to implement inclusive inquiry. And we've used this idea of the levels of use framework in order to support teachers as they were engaging with these processes. So as you can see, what inclusive inquiry means is that we have a trio of teachers forming a research group. And then they choose 3 students from their class, seen as hard to reach in some way, that will become researchers. Then they train the student researchers. This is again from our English schools, and they train them in how to use specific research methods. And particularly the use of observation, because the process involves observing lessons. So here they are practicing observation. They were practicing from a distance. There was a glass wall there in the class, and then going inside, and then they had a debrief at the end and trying to figure out what does it mean observing a lesson. Then they gather the views of their classmates. So each group decides which methods are they going to use in order to be gathering their classmates' views. So each group decided differently. And the first children you've heard, that's what they were referring to. So they stand in front and they ask their classmates to carry out certain activities. And they gather all that information. At the end of this, they analyze and they identify what are their ideas about learning and teaching to design a lesson. So here in this picture, we have the 3 teachers that were working together with the 9 student researchers, and they are reporting back to them what has happened as a result of the data analysis they carried out and what features of learning and teaching should be taken into account in order to develop learning activities that enable active participation of all students. Following that, the first teacher teaches the lesson, whilst the student researchers from the other classes and the teachers from the other classes are observing the lesson. The focus is not on the teacher, the focus is on the activities that they develop jointly. This is their lesson, and they are discussing, is this working or is it not? Some of them choose to write down, others just wrote on Post-it notes, others just wanted to report back. So at the end of the lessons, they sit together, they analyze, they change the lesson, and the process is repeated 3 times. So the second teacher teaches, the other students are observing, and the lesson is modified every time, these are ideas informed by lesson study approaches, and we've merged the student voices dimension. As I've said, we carried out analysis of data from all the schools that participated, and we highlighted the impacts, particularly on students, engagement on the lessons, improvements in confidence, ensuring that some children that were very difficult to be included in class were included, but changing of relationships with links with other researchers in the field as well, and also this idea of teacher development. So this collaboration led to focusing on matters of detail and sharing techniques and becoming more sensitive about students' views and certain individuals' pupils. So this was the second phase, the collaborative action research. And I now see myself this year, started from last year, entering a new phase in my direction as a researcher. So last year, alongside colleagues that are in the room and some online, we worked on this project that we focus on developing a citywide initiative. So we piloted an approach to expand this from this coming year. So we work with a network of 5 schools, all primary, all in Southampton, and these are our partner schools for that project, which happened last year. And we still, as researchers, had the overarching question. So the question is, how can we promote inclusion through an engagement with pupil voices? And a lot of emphasis on the use of participatory research methods in order to do that. But what was different, which wasn't happening in the previous projects that I was engaged with, was that the school had a leading role in determining their own area of focus, their own research question. So we had the first workshop at the university in this very room that you're all in. And we brought 3 teachers from each of the schools, and we engaged with these ideas of what does it mean carrying out collaborative action research, as well as engaged with participatory methods that they could use with their students when they go back to school. And we spent a considerable amount of time during the day, as well as later when we visited the schools, in refining the questions. So each of the questions came up with their question, with that idea in mind to involve students to drive their solutions to these questions. So you can see one focus on supporting boys to improve writing, others on becoming more confident in their learning, others students' aspirations, and others focus on using appropriate vocabulary to communicate their ideas in their learning. We've got the full set of accounts of practice. I've left them on the back. If you're interested at the end, please take a copy so that you read the whole story. So just to give you a flavor, as I said, we engaged with a range of participatory approaches, and then the schools could choose the ones that they wanted to use. So in the first picture on the left-hand side, we can see students using Post-it notes. The teacher gave them some unfinished sentences based on what they wanted to find out, which was about boys writing. And she was training the researchers who then went and did it with their classmates. We have some reception class, 5 to 6 year olds, that they use the Diamond 9 approach with 4 pictures, and they had to rank what they saw as more important and what as least helpful for, again, helping them with writing in reception classes. And in the other 2 pictures, you can see schools that develop the idea of student researchers, and they ask them to keep notes in order to discuss. And the changes in each of the schools varied, but all the schools had made changes to their practices, refining what they were doing based on what the children have found and based on what they thought about through the dialogues that they had with them, including examples such as the way that teachers are giving instructions. So we were observing in one of the schools, and one of the student researchers immediately said, after we observed that, the teacher was very clear. She was saying, first, you need to do this. Second, you need to do this. And that was something that led to discussion, and all the teachers are now much more conscious about what helps children with their learning. So let's listen to some of these student researchers' views and voices.
Being a student researcher, I find that trying to help children be confident in their learning is an inspiring thing for everyone.
Being a student researcher, I think to help people in their learning and show more confidence as well.
But it felt like he was highly important job. I think it's a really good project to be in, because it not only it helps children, but it also helps you too, because it's yeah.
In what ways does it help you?
It helps you because it makes you have more ideas for your class, and also more ideas for the class that you're studying about.
I liked it. I feel really good to go in other classes, and it helped me to be more confident in my learning.
I felt really happy and excited. Yeah, excited.
Excited. You said something else. Say
Confused.
Confused? Why were you confused?
Because I've never heard of it before.
Because at first we didn't know what it was.
It made me feel excited at first because I didn't know what it was, but I think it was something good. And then when we went to year 5, I knew what it was, so then I got a little bit excited. Then we started doing other stuff, so it was nice.
It made me really happy because Miss told us about it when she said our names and we were gonna be the student researchers, and just happy. it made me like very excited to like see other classes and help them, and like to help them with their learning, to study more. Like, yeah.
Like, if we didn't do this, we won't feel more comfortable in class. So since we've done this, it makes us feel more comfortable in class.
More comfortable doing what?
Learning and answering questions.
So again, we know from what the teachers are saying that some of these students were not participating in class at all. They were not confident to get up and ask the teacher. And by the end of this study, we saw how they changed the way they were behaving, and we also noticed these changes. But the teachers know them a lot better than we do, that we are the outsiders. So where next? So we now, as I said, over the years, I've had partnerships with schools, especially with one school here in Southampton since 2015. But now we are formalizing this, and we've created the Research Practice Partnership in September 2023. And we collaboratively with the practitioners from the 5 schools that were involved in the first study agreed on this title of School Voices. So we are not just focusing on student voices, because it's much more than students' voices. It's about teachers, it's about families that we want to involve as well as other participants in the school. And the difference between what I was doing up to last year is that we are now setting out for this long-term collaboration as it has been defined by researchers in the United States, and focusing on this educational improvement or equitable transformation through engagement with research. And these partnerships are intentionally organized to connect diverse forms of expertise. So practitioners bring their own expertise, students bring their own expertise, and we bring our own expertise. So it is about connecting, but also shifting power relations in this research endeavor to ensure that all partners have a say in the joint work. So we are setting out intentionally to do this now. And the way that we have done it is that the schools that were involved last year are now taking a much more leading role. They are becoming hub schools that they have helped us with recruiting additional schools, and they are going to be supporting other schools to implement such approaches whilst expanding in their own context. So the students that you saw in the previous video have already trained new student researchers in that context. So they are expanding in a different way in their own context. And we are planning a workshop collaboratively, and we will have more schools coming along, and we are having that in a couple of weeks' time. At the same time, we are linking to other existing networks and research practice partnerships in other countries that I have links with. And our focus is on making a difference in children's lives through these approaches, collaborative approaches of doing research with schools. Implications for us as researchers: it is very rewarding and it can be transformative, but I'm using the words of Michael Fielding, who talked about research that involves students and that it requires a rupture of the ordinary. Is not something that is not challenging. It makes us take different roles, what it means to be a student, what it means to be a teacher, and I'm also saying what it means to be a researcher. And it is about, as the Research Practice Partnership was saying, addressing issues of power. And it is about when to step in and when to step back. In these processes, it's challenging decisions you need to be making. You may not necessarily agree with the approaches that the schools are taking, and you as a researcher that feels the duty to disrupt may have to say that you're going to be waiting for the right moment to do that. And other challenges is this time consuming. All research is time consuming. This involves certain complexities, especially with the very busy context of school. We have changes of schools, changes of staff all the time. We had one named school last week, and this week it's another one because we had a change of head teacher, for example, and it's not the right time to be involved, but they are still committed varying levels of commitment, and of course, when we as researchers are monitoring, we want things to be done in the way that we envisioned, and we need to find ways of fidelity of implementation. So the levels of use framework was part of those efforts. So to sum up, I started off with research on schools, as I said, grounded theory approaches, ethnographic studies, and very much focusing on active engagement of participants to the extent that I could. But it was more an outsider, a distant researcher. And I moved into this research with schools, collaborative action research, but still we as researchers dominating the decisions, dominating the research agendas. And now I'm moving into this direction of research practice partnerships, which I'm handling over more power to the schools, but we have an important role to be playing, different roles of us as researchers. We are there as critical friends. So in each of the stages, it is different kinds of us as researchers. And of course, there are different kinds of research. This is the kind of research that I am doing. This is not the only way forward in education. So my final thoughts, for research to matter, as Oak says, it is to better society and schools. It must escape the ivory tower and engage in the public sphere. So we must be prepared to leave the university walls, go out there, engage with them, bring them here, we go there. There were lots of visits, there were lots of negotiations, and we have a duty to do that. But they involve complex processes, such approaches, social processes, complex social processes, as we've seen. And the question for me and for each one of us, as I said, there's different kinds of research, is how do we see ourselves as researchers? Personally, I'm very clear that I see my role as making a difference within schools. That's my role as a researcher. And I'm using here Alan Dyson's term of alternative truths. So he argued back in 1998 that the availability of different definitions of validity, and when we talk about qualitative research, talking about trustworthiness, but he's arguing that we're not looking for finding the truth out there when we are engaging in context as researchers, but of pathways to alternative truths. So I'm committed to this idea of dialogues in research at different levels, practitioners, researchers, students, and I'm arguing we can engage with alternative truths. And through those alternative truths, collectively find of ways forwards for promoting inclusion in schools. Thank you very much for your attention. And I've got the list of references and a list of relevant publications if anybody is interested. Thank you.